Today on Absolute Anthem, we are finally finishing our Javelin Deep Dive mini-series by taking a look at the Ranger. Let me remind you that last does not make a least, and that is absolutely the case in the case of the Ranger, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the Ranger, like all the other Javelins, can, of course, equip 2 firearms. It also has its own innate melee ability that comes in the form of a shock mace. It's a shock mace. BioWare is really on the nose with their naming of gear and abilities in Anthem, and a shock mace does exactly what you'd think it does. However, I do like the way BioWare put it in their blog post. It's an electrified mace that sends a medically inadvisable amount of voltage through its enemies. Now, when we talk about the Ranger Javelin's gear trees, its ability trees, they actually come in 3 unique forms. So we have the grenade gear tree, we've got the assault launcher gear tree, which is a wrist-mounted launcher like the assault launcher for the Colossus, as well as, of course, the support gear. They're not unique to the entire roster of Javelins, but the way in which they're set up is unique because the other Javelins seem to share similarities. They have 2 launchers, or they have a bunch of seals that function in a similar way. From a lore and written perspective, the Ranger actually just comes across as more versatile, and that makes sense because that is exactly what BioWare intended. So why don't we take a look at that menagerie of grenade types that the Ranger is going to be rocking and rolling come February. To kick things off, we've got the good old-fashioned frag grenade, which deals impressive damage in a large area of effect. We've got an inferno grenade, which ignites an area, dealing damage and setting enemies ablaze. We've got some AoE, some damage over time, bit of crowd control here. We've got a frost grenade, which damages and freezes enemies in place, more crowd control, and of course, we've seen this numerous times, allowing the Ranger to set up enemies for combo attacks with teammates like the Colossus and its multi-mortar. We've got seeker grenades, which split into smaller sub-munitions, basically smaller grenades, which then seek out the nearest enemy. And we've got a big old sticky bomb, which attaches to a single target for a contained, high-damage blast. You're probably seeing a trend if you've been following the series or looking at the ability list for all the different Javelins. They all seem to have a variety of AoE, damage over time, and even single target attacks. This is really going to allow you to build the Javelin playstyle you want to build. Let's move on and take a look at that wrist-mounted fancy pants assault launcher gear set. We've got a homing missile, which fires a projectile that seeks out a target for a small area of effect explosion. We've got an energy pulse, which unleashes a blast of pure energy, hitting a single target with incredible force. We've got a spark beam, which fires a sustained beam of energy for continuous damage. I'm thinking this is going to be sort of like a tracking weapon, almost like the lightning gun in Quake. So you're going to have to physically track targets as it disperses its damage through that spark beam. We've got venom darts, which launch a volley of darts that seek out a target for acid damage. And we've got a blast missile, which fires a missile that explodes for AoE damage. So it's a big rocket, basically. It's a missile. It's a missile launcher, rocket launcher. You ever notice that in games? It was always kind of like, what's the difference? Obviously, one is firing probably a rocket-propelled grenade, and the other is actually firing like a missile with the warhead, but it was GoldenEye, and who knew the difference? Last, we've got the Ranger Javelin support gear, which includes Bulwark Point, which deploys a spherical field, say that 10 times fast, which deflects incoming enemy projectiles, and we've got Muster Point, which creates a field which increases weapon damage for teammates who enter its radius. So you can basically choose here. Do you want to have more defensive capabilities that protect you and your team, or do you want to have an offensive buff that can support you and your team? Again, choices, playstyle. I like the way BioWare refers to the Ranger as a skillful field general, because when I look at this ability set, and when I look at that support gear selection, and when you think about the ratio of like armor and health and shielding to movement capabilities that the Ranger is probably going to have, it really does come across as that role that will be skipping across the battlefield, filling in for different roles, you know, whether it be supporting teammates with damage, just doing direct damage, supporting teammates with defensive capabilities or with buffs. I could just see myself playing the Ranger and just booping all around the place, you know, sort of like a John Rambo running from the back of a 50 cal mounted to a Jeep, then running over, picking up a missile launcher to blow up a tank, and then, hopping onto an AA gun to take out a helicopter. You just kind of bouncing all over the place, being where the team needs you to be, sort of multitasking to the greatest extent to make yourself as valuable as possible to your team across a variety of different roles, depending on the playstyle and, of course, the ability list that you build out from these 3 trees. gets me giddy, man. As much as I'm like stoked for the Colossus, I actually really still love the Ranger, and I think it's just that really sleek and simple design of the Ranger itself. It very much feels like something that Tony Stark might have built had he existed in whatever world Anthem takes place in, and I dig that about that. And of course, we can't forget how insanely awesome the Ranger's ultimate ability, which is simply referred to as multi-target missile battery, is. I mean, it locks onto a bunch of targets. We see the Ranger sort of lock itself down, support itself from the weight of all of those missiles firing, and then just this huge pod of missiles pew, 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 just annihilate everything that it locked onto. It's a very cool looking javelin in appearance and in style and in aesthetic and in everything, and I think that's why it was one of the first javelins we saw. Let's go back though and quickly take a look at this list of abilities and just once again recognize the potential here to build out for specific play styles. You know, for example, if we wanted to focus heavily on like single target, like high DPS, maybe we'd go with something like Spark Beam or Energy Pulse and then mix that with Sticky Bomb. Maybe we even stick that with Frost Grenade because we're not so much worried about setting up with our team, but we want to set ourselves up. So we're tossing them Frost Grenades, freezing targets, maybe dealing damage with our primary. Maybe we got a shotgun we're rocking and rolling. Maybe it's a big old precision rifle. And then we come in and we start just hitting things with that Spark Beam, just direct beam damage. Or maybe we break out the Energy Pulse, we whack them with a shotgun, and then finish them off with the Energy Pulse. There's a lot of opportunities for just getting down and dirty, getting in the thick of it with the Ranger, but there's also plenty of opportunities to sit back and support your team. So maybe you're running something like those Venom Darts, and you just launch a volley on a group of targets, get that acid damage, the Interceptor moves in, starts doing some damage, you know, your Colossus comes in, uses one of its coils, like the shot coil, to just make sure that that damage stacks on top of that acid damage. And maybe on top of that, you were running something like your Seeker Grenades. You know, again, just really focused on AoE, maybe using that Inferno Grenade for some crowd control, getting that AoE plus that damage over time. There's just, without even really seeing these things in action and knowing how much damage they do, you can see the potential here, and I totally dig that. Now, since this is the last video in the series, I wanted to close out by breaking down once again how collecting and looting gear is going to work, because I think a lot of people are even more confused by this now that they've seen these gear lists, these ability lists, or they've just recently started following Anthem and they just have no idea what the hell anybody's talking about. So when we look at the grenade tree, for example, frag grenades, Inferno grenades, frost grenades, seeker grenades, sticky bombs, those are all going to come in the form of a sort of gear module that you apply or equip to your javelin. So if I select the frost grenade, for example, I have the frost grenade. However, you'll be able to loot variants of the frost grenade that come in different rarities, that have different levels, that are more powerful, that might even have additional bonus statistics equipped to them. For example, maybe that frost grenade deploys itself to a larger area of effect, freezing more enemies, maybe freezing them for a longer period of time, or maybe it does more damage when they're frozen. The same could be said for something like our Venom Darts. If we scroll down to our Assault Launcher, our Venom Darts, they launch a volley of darts. Maybe it fires more darts. Maybe those darts do greater damage over time through the acid attack. These are all things that are going to be modified by you looting different versions, different rarity levels, and different power levels of these different pieces of gear. So when we talk about Seals for the Storm, it's the same thing. When we talk about Ordnance for the Colossus, it's the same thing. When we talk about the Interceptor and its different systems, it's the same thing. You're going to be able to loot gear pieces, system abilities, ordnance abilities, and seals that all come in different flavors, different rarities that might have bonus stats on them. Now, we've not seen an example of these bonus stats, but we have seen the Colossus rocking a sort of legendary mortar launcher that obviously gave it some sort of a benefit to damage output or AoE or whatever it might have been. So I'm going to be curious to see just how all of that comes together. Nonetheless, that is how it is going to function, at least as we know right now, as it's been discussed by BioWare. So hopefully that clarifies some things for you guys. That is totally going to do it for me. We've now looked at all 4 of the javelins. I do want to give you guys a bit of a heads up, start talking a little bit about the ways in which I'm going to be producing content for Anthem after launch. And this series is kind of indicative of how I'm going to be doing my build series. So post-launch, I'll be playing the Ranger. I'll probably pick one Javelin because I'm only one person, and I'll probably lock it down on PC, and then I'll have one Javelin on Xbox, and I'll lock it down there, and I'll be playing a lot of 2 Javelins at a time if I can. If my brain and my my ability to play games for extended periods of time allows me to. And then I'll start making builds. So I'll probably share some early build ideas with you. I'd like to make 2 series essentially. One that is all about suggestive builds, so builds that haven't really been tested completely in terms of their like maximum efficiency, but builds that I maybe have fun with. Builds that I'm like, you know, I played with my friends with this build and it just works. It's fun. We haven't looked at the numbers, the damage output. I'm not really a numbers guy, so I like doing an early series like that where it's just like, this felt good, this was fun to play with. For people who maybe don't take the game as seriously, who aren't really obsessed over min-maxing. Then, as we get deeper into the game, we will do a build series for min-maxing. So we might have a build for the Ranger Javelin that combines muster points and venom darts and the frost grenade, for example. And I'm like, this build works great for this reason. You know, we might do solo builds that work better with groups. There's going to be a lot of variety in that build series, and it seems like something I'm probably going to be able to do a lot of, you know, so it'll be one of those things that I don't rush. I kind of let happen organically, but when it does happen, you'll see a video like this, and it'll have just a lot more editing, a lot more focusing on showcasing gameplay and damage numbers for you guys, and, you know, kind of letting you know why I thought that build worked. I'm always going to encourage people to experiment and to do their own thing. I'm not a slave to the meta. I don't like being a slave to the meta. I like to have fun. So if you're looking for that sort of thing post-launch, that's what you can expect here on the channel. Thank you guys once again so much for watching. I hope you have an outstanding weekend, and as always, please be awesome to one another, because at the end of the day, it's all we really got.